Hey everyone, it's Andrzej on Software. This week I'm on a chess tournament in Poland at the sea. It's beautiful here, and somehow whenever I'm at a chess tournament it inspires me to think about event sourcing and events. Mostly because a game of chess is a collection of events. Each move is an event. Then the game ends when my opponent gives up. The result is probably an event, but you could say it's a projection of events, of sequence of moves and the decision of my opponent to give up. Then the whole chess tournament is like the results, the last result, whether we, for example, as a team are promoted to the first league. This is also an event, but on the other hand, it's a projection based on those events. So you can look at it differently. My recent episodes were about command sourcing, and it triggered really interesting feedback, and I'm really grateful to everyone who replied to talk about it on many different channels. One topic that seems to be interesting is the idea of, well, the problem of whether we can or should change the events which happened in the past. And I think there's like multiple reasons you may want to change the events, and they're not equal, so probably they should be treated differently. Somehow you may have an event which you want to fix because there is just a minor, renaming of an attribute. So it's not really changing the history. It's more like polishing it or fixing it a little bit. It doesn't really change the facts. But then you sometimes have you see that you have a first name, last name, but then you want to add a surname to the event. And then whether you should be correcting the old events to contain surname as the empty field, or should it be a new version of the event. I've seen different advices here, and to be honest, usually I'm opinionated on different topics, but in here I'm still watching, I'm still observing what we do on our projects. I'm still watching and learning from other people how they approach it. So there are different attitudes. Like, for example, one attitude is that never change the history. That's period, never. There is no reason to do that. So that's what I like about this approach is that this is very consistent and clear. There are some rules. I like when within the project we have clear rules. On the other hand, we can have approach which says it's okay to change the events because you need it, and it's much easier and simpler to just migrate the schema of the events instead of dealing with the versioning and so on, which is difficult. So I get it also. I understand the rules. I would be happy to accept those in the project if we are consistent with applying those rules. In the Rails Event Store, which we develop as a library for dealing with event sourcing and dealing with CQRS, we are working right now. There is a pull request, which at the moment of recording this podcast is open, where we add a new method. I think it's called overwrite. Yes, it's called overwrite, where we allow to take an existing event and overwrite it with a new kind of version of the event, but new as you just replace this thing. So we want to allow it, but for those people obviously who know what they do, they can easily do damaging stuff for their projects if they overuse it. In the Rails community, we have the idea of migrations. So I wonder if we can support the idea of migrations later in the future. Also, the topic of introducing overall the internal discussions, how the internals of the Rails Event Store should look like, is also very interesting. We have a large group of contributors to the project, and what we have been recently discussing is whether the idea of being event-driven should be applied to the Rails Event Store itself. So one thing is being event-driven. Second thing, whether we should apply CQRS to the internals of the Rails Event Store itself. So those are mostly there are implementation details, but for example, if we now add the overwrite method to change the events, should we at least as an event store keep track of those changes easily, so that you can easily track that someone did that change? Under the hood, Rails Event Store is a very simple thing. It's just two tables, events and events in streams. And there are no internal read models, there are no internal events yet, at the moment at least. It's not clear whether we will have this. It's not clear whether there's an advantage to that. I really like discussing this topic, but I don't have really a decisive opinion yet. I'm just trying to come up with some ideas. So this is where we are with the Rails Event Store, and this is also something that we'll probably discuss. I mentioned that during the RailsCon, the Rails Event Store conference, we will have the workshop, which already is sold. Not all the tickets sold yet, but there is a number of people who already bought it. The next day will be conference, which we will talk mostly about the production usages of Rails Event Store, but also I will talk a little bit about the future vision. And then the third day we'll have a hackathon where we will focus more on the internals of the Rails Event Store. So people will be able to learn how Rails Event Store works under the hood, what kind of development rules we try to apply. For example, you can learn about mutation testing. And the third day, so the hackathon is free to everyone. So this is the moment where we can easily discuss the internals. So this is what it was about the Rails Event Store conference. And back to the event, changing the history of the events, the topic was triggered because I used it as one argument for using command sourcing. And one of the reasons I've used was that it simplifies the problem of having to deal with the events version. So being able to be liberal with the way we change the events history or the events themselves may reduce this argument. I agree with that, because this will be then probably less needed. So still, I'm not sure. This episode is not really about teaching you something, but it's more like sharing what is my current understanding of this concept. And there was also another comment which I will probably address in another episode, whether command sourcing as a name, as a term, is correct, because it's not sourcing in the same meaning as we do event sourcing. So this is an interesting, maybe we should call it command replaying. But what's interesting is that I think with the idea of command sourcing, we couple together several concepts. I couple together several concepts. And one of them is something that probably many of us would agree with, that it's overall a good idea to store the commands, to persist them. Whether you will replay them or source them or whatever you call them later, that's another topic. But the idea of storing them and being able to always get back to them if needed, or automate something or write some scripts thanks to them, this sounds intuitively like a good idea, and probably not the thing that usually in many, especially Rails projects, I've seen so far. So usually in the Rails projects, we just see the last history, and no history changes in terms of events, but also no persistence, no storage for the user intents or the client of the system intents. So this is all interesting concepts being coupled together. I think that's it for today. Thanks for listening, and many thanks for all the comments and discussions. I really appreciate that, and I learned a lot from that. Thank you. Bye.